Welcome everyone to the March 2023 meeting of the Metropolitan Washington Old Time Radio Club. It is wonderful to see so many of you. Some of you we haven't seen in a while, and others we are old faithfuls, and that is great too. And do we have anyone visiting tonight? Raise a hand or speak up, or whatever way you can to. I'm recognizing most of the names on the screen, so I'm not sure we have any.
I believe Jerry's a new member since our last meeting, I believe.
Well, that's wonderful, Jerry. Thank you.
Yes.
We're always excited when we get new members. It's a great thing. And spread the word. We're here the second Friday of every month, live and in person.
Very good.
Thank you, Joni, too. Sometimes I need prompts. I mean, what can I say? But I try to pick up on those prompts. A couple of announcements that I'll make at the beginning here, and then we can get more into them when we go to the business portion of our meeting. But I will repeat, and this is important, that Bob Cockrum, our intrepid editor of Radio Recall, will be stepping down October 23, 2023. And so I would love to see at least one or two people say, hey, that's something I'd like to try my hand at. And Bob will give you help and guidance. And we also have Martin Grams Jr. on the call tonight, and he was the editor before him, and of course, Jack French. So we've got a lot of people who can help. So please keep that in mind. Also, I am going to turn over to John Abbott for, I think, a modest amount of time, talk about the latest club endeavor. So take it away, John.
Okay, to quote the late Gabriel Heater, there's good news tonight. Several months ago, we talked about the fact that Carl Shadow and Joe Webb and Jack French had combined, between the three of them, had found a previously unknown episode of Candy Matson, Yukon 28209, and they got an audio copy of it. There was only one problem. It was part 1 of 2. And so I took it upon myself to see if there's any way I could find the script for part 2. And as of Tuesday, I have the script for part 2, Telegram from a Friend, Candy Matson. So what I'm going to do is lay the groundwork for a Candy Matson extravaganza sometime later this year, maybe possibly even early next year, where we're going to do both episodes on a program. Since they're about 20-25 minutes long each, I think we can do that with no problem. So that's something that I will be looking for volunteers for later in the year. But in the interim, in February, Carl Shadow, our intrepid janitor at the Library of Congress, he was rummaging through the stacks, and he found.
Watch that, John. Yes, I'm lurking in the shadows, John.
Okay, good. He found a script for an audition of a program called the Double I. Double I standing for Insurance Investigator. Program I like to call Johnny Dollar before there was a Johnny Dollar. So he got me a copy of the script. I'm working on it even as we speak. And tonight, I want to put out a call to everybody who would like to participate in a recreation of that script. what I'm going to do, we're looking for 8.5 characters. We're looking for 2 female voices. One is an older, cultured, commanding woman in her 60s. The other is a 20-something, young lady. And there's a secretary who has 1 line. So if you would like to start your rise to fame and fortune with that 1 line, let me know. On the male side, we have 6 voices that we need to have. One is an office manager. Think about Jeffrey Lyons in Jeff Regan, Investigator. Yeah, kind of mercurial, nice 1 minute, nasty the next. We have an insurance investigator who in the script is explicitly given to Edmund O'Brien, although we have no evidence that the program was ever actually recorded. So he's, nice. Think Dick Powell, think William Powell, think Edmund O'Brien, Charlie, all the Johnny Dollars, put them all together, and that's what we're looking for. Again, a secretary. We have a very British, very correct butler. We have the cultured woman and her daughter. We have a young man, early 20s, pleasant, young, carefree. We have his father, who's cultured, about 50, rather unctuous and smarmy. And we need an announcer. So if you would like to participate, this is what we're going to do. Send an email to webmaster@MWOTRC.com. That will get forwarded to my other email account and include your name, your phone number, what role you think you'd like to do. And I will get back to you with a phone call. We'll talk about it a little bit. Once we have everything lined up, I'm going to schedule a series of Zoom meetings, one-on-one, me and whoever's playing a role. And you will read your roles. I will capture the audio, and then I will use that to spinfold, mutilate the audio and stuff into a presentation that is much more amenable to Zoom than trying to get 6 people to talk at once and not getting any of them. So that's something to look forward to. I've got about 2 pages of sound effects, of which I've got a lot of them, but we're going to be working on that. I would like to do that sometime, maybe in the late summer, autumn, depending on what Frank has in the pipeline. So, we're going to be recreating. Actually, this is not a recreation. This is a creation. So, we'll be doing that later on this year. Again, if you're interested, send an email to webmaster@MWOTRC.com. And we'll be in touch. So that's what we've got planned. We went from a dearth of any kind of recreations to have more stuff that we know what to do with. That is a good thing. So we will end the John Abbott Talk a Lot meeting and turn it back over to Wendy.
Thank you. I think Martin Graham's had his hand up. Did you have a question or an observation, Martin? Martin?
Sorry, I'm using an iPad and I was trying to figure out the buttons. And no, I actually raised my hand because I pushed the wrong button.
Oh, okay. But I would like the record to show I do try to pay attention to these things.
It's okay.
No problem. All right. Well, that's great. And it's very exciting to have us sort of moving forward and figuring some of this stuff out. So thank you to Carl and to John for just grabbing the baton and running with it. It's exciting, and it's been too long since we've done a recreation. So thank you.
And I'm going to put my email address in the chat. There were some who
it's also
did not get it.
It's also on the website. If you look at staff, if you go to Webmaster, you can click on that and get to John well in an
It'll
email.
also be in the minutes when I send them out.
Outstanding. Well, we'll see how many people read the minutes. Uh, which reminds me, did anyone have any corrections to last month's minutes? I didn't, but perhaps someone else caught something. I missed some of the little finer points sometimes. Silence is golden. All right, well, I will assume then that the minutes are acceptable to everyone, and I will at this point turn the meeting over to our own Frank Morgan for our first 15. So let me make you co-host. There you are, Frank. Take it away.
Okay, thank you. Now, I think I've shared the screen, I've shared the audio, and we should be ready to go. All right, tonight's first 15 is the true adventures of junior G-men. In the 1920s and 1930s, the escapades of criminals of the era were splashed across the headlines of every newspaper. Bonnie and Clyde, John Dillinger, Al Capone, and Babyface Nelson were just a few of the many names familiar not only to adults, but to children as well. At the same time, the exploits of the federal agents to track down and arrest the criminals were headline makers as well. While most federal agents avoided the limelight, Melvin Purvis was not one of them. After tracking down John Dillinger, Purvis remained with the FBI for about a year, then went into practice law in San Francisco. When Post Serials created Inspector Post's Detective Corps, Purvis saw an opportunity to take advantage of his celebrity and worked a deal with Post to rename the Corps as the Melvin Purvis Junior G-Man Corps. Seeing an opportunity to add to its growing list of original programming, New York City radio station WOR created the True Adventures of the Junior G-Men. It was a serialized adventure series produced by Don Peterson. Peterson was also the syndicator of the program and an actor. It was heard on WOR on Monday, Wednesday, and Fridays, beginning on June 1st of 1936 and ending on May 27th of 1938. In all, 312 episodes were produced. Kids were urged to write in for membership kits, cards, and badges. Each program would open with the sound of the blaring of police car sirens, the clicking of teletype machines, and the announcer teasing of the adventure of that evening. The stories were told in the form of reports by the young operatives to the director. In addition to Don Peterson, the acting duties were performed by any number of the stock actors on the staff at WOR. Two young actors with multiple appearances were Frankie Darrow and Sherman McGregor. Darrow began his acting career at age 7. He's mostly known for his movie career. He appeared in more than 100 movies. The only photo I could find of McGregor was in his role as the leader of the Raccoon Lodge on the TV show The Honeymooners. Sherman McGregor is better known to old-time radio listeners as Jock McGregor, producer and director of such shows as The Cisco Kid, The Mysterious Traveler, Nick Carter, Master Detective, The Sealed Book, The Strange Dr. Weir. As I mentioned, most of the storylines were serialized with 2 or 3 episodes to complete the story. The episode I'm playing tonight is the 3rd installment of The League of One-Legged Men. In the opening, of course, the announcer will give you all the background you need to understand the story. So from 1936, The True Adventures of the Junior G-Men brings us the final episode of The League of One-Legged Men.
Donald Peterson presents The True Adventures of Junior G-Men. The Junior G-Men are on the air, speeding to your homes, ready for action. Stand by. All Junior G-men, stand by. Stand by for the thrilling details of the League of One-Legged Men. Calling all Junior G-men. Calling all Junior G-men. Stand by for report of Junior G-man Jerry Dodge concerning the League of One-Legged Men. Conclusion of report number 933 is given by operator Jerry Dodge of Harrison.
Some time ago, an ad appeared in the Harrison Eagle asking that all one-legged men get in touch with a Mr. Anthony Bishop. Robert Hale, a former G-man who'd lost his leg as a result of a gang battle, received permission to investigate. He learned that a Mr. Bishop was apparently the head of a criminal organization known as the League of One-Legged Men. Each of the members was at one time or another called upon to smuggle dope concealed in his artificial leg. Now, Mr. Hale finally succeeded in joining the League under the name of Hanlon and was sent to London for a supply of dope. When he returned and found me working in Mr. Bishop's store, he said I'd have to quit, and when I refused, told me the whole story. Unfortunately, Mr. Bishop was in his office and overheard everything. That's how it happened that we, Mr. Hale and I, were taken to Chinatown where Lo Sang-Koo, a Chinaman who was really the head of the League, was waiting for us. We were locked in a room while Mr. Bishop was sent to see Lo Sang-Koo. A little while later, a woman called Queenie came to the door, said Lo Sang-Koo wanted to see us, and then after she left.
And now, Mr. Hanlon, and you young man, making yourselves comfortable, please. Most very happy to making your acquaintance.
Sorry, I can't return the compliment. Where's Bishop?
He finding it necessary to leave. He be back though soon, very soon. In meantime, you like Chinese music?
At a time like this? Not very much.
Too bad. I always finding music very...
Look here, Lo Sang-Koo, let's get it over with. What's going to happen to us?
Oh, I will be informing you soon, very soon. You like Chinese music?
That all depends on the tune, Lo Sang-Koo. I don't particularly care for this one.
So sorry. Queenie?
Yeah?
Please to be putting stop to Chinese music.
Sure, Lo Sang-Koo. It'll be a pleasure to turn this thing off.
And now, Mr. Hanlon, if you...
Wait a minute.
You wishing to say something?
Yeah, plenty. Now get this, Lo Sang-Koo, and think it over. If you go ahead with your plans, sooner or later the cops will catch up with you, and when they do, they'll not only be charged with dope smuggling, but murder as well.
You are suggesting
that you don't go ahead with this, that you give yourself up, face the charge of dope smuggling, and take
sorry to informing you, Mr. Hanlon, that being most ridiculous suggestion to which Lo Sang-Koo ever having listened.
Okay, Lo Sang-Koo, it's your game. You've got all the cards, and you'll play them your own way. But it's a losing game, and you'll lose. As for me, well, I'm not afraid. Not a bit. If it weren't for this boy,
If it were not being for your wagging tongue, Mr. Hanlon, boy never being in most unfortunate predicament.
Yeah. I guess you're right, Lo Sang-Koo. And that's what bothers me most. If only I hadn't...
Well, it's all right. I'm not afraid. Not very much, anyhow.
You're a good kid, Jerry. And you've got what it takes. I wouldn't blame you if you... Look here, Lo Sang-Koo. If you're any kind of a man at all, you'll let this kid go. You'll give him a chance to...
Very sorry.
But you can't permit him to...
Mind's being made up, Mr. Hanlon. Sorry. Most very sorry.
There's nothing I can say to make you change your mind? No promise you'll accept?
Sorry. Very sorry. And now, Queenie will see that you are safely confined in temporary prison.
You mean to tell me
You will be locked in room to wait return of Mr. Bishop.
And when Bishop returns...
I will no longer be necessary to detain you. Queenie?
Yeah?
Please to be taking honorable guests back to room.
Yeah, sure, Lo Sang-Koo, sure. Come on along, you two. Follow me. Follow me.
And so Mr. Hale and I were led back to the room we'd originally occupied. And then, just as the woman called Queenie was...
And that's about all, I guess. Oh, I'll be getting...
Wait a minute.
Yeah, what you want?
What do you want?
I don't get you, mister. What do you mean?
What's it worth to you to get us out of this jam?
You mean you want me to help you escape?
It's worth thinking about, Queenie. We'll be well taken care of.
Yeah, sure. Hello, Sanku. He'd kill me, that's what he'd do.
He'd never have a chance.
You ain't gonna get the chance, 'cause I ain't gonna help you.
But look here, if you...
Ain't no use, mister, no use at all. Maybe my life ain't all it should be, but I'm hanging on to it just the same.
Now, wait a minute, let me...
I told you, mister, there ain't no use.
But I can promise you that... Well, that's that. She was just about our last chance.
Yeah, just about.
Only there were a way to get out. Only that window weren't.
Well, do you suppose that one of the bars might be loose?
I doubt it, Joey. That'd be almost too much to expect.
Well, let's make sure. Let's have a look.
Okay. Come on. Let's have a look.
Right.
Till I raise this window.
It seems to be tougher.
There, that does it. Now, let's see. We'll try each one of these bars.
Well, we can forget about this one. We'll never be able to budget an inch.
These. Wait a minute. How about this one? Seems to be looser than any of the others. Not a bit. I'm afraid we're licked, Jerry.
And I'm afraid you're right. God, gee whiz, if only this room were at the front of the house and not at the side, we'd probably be able to attract the attention of some passerby. As it is,
I'm afraid no one will pass through this alley. Almost too narrow to...
Well, do you suppose we could yell for help?
We'd have to yell too loud.
Yeah, I suppose that's right. The street's so far away, and somebody in the house would be sure to hear us yelling, and that wouldn't be so good.
No, that's just it. We'd be taking too much of it.
Hey, gee whiz, look.
What's the matter?
Look, there, coming down the alley. Do you see that?
A cat. A black cat.
We've got to get it to jump up here on the window ledge.
Yeah, and then?
Well, we'll write a message on the biggest piece of paper we can find and attach it to the cat's neck and then...
Set the cat loose, hoping that someone will be curious enough to look at that paper long enough to see what's written on it.
Yeah, sure, that's it. Oh, what do you think?
It's a chance, Jerry. It's a good chance. And as far as I'm concerned, it's the cat's neck. But come on, let's see what we can do. Only it isn't one of those scary cats.
Well, fortunately for us, that particular black cat was pretty tame and friendly enough to jump up on the window ledge without very much urging. Well, I reached through the bars and held it there while Mr. Hale wrote a message on the back of a large envelope. Then, after the note had been attached to the cat, I let it go and watched it slowly disappear down the alley. It was just about 15 minutes later that Mrs. Moran opened the front door of a nearby tenement house, and her little girl...
Mommy, please, Mommy, Mama, get us some milk. It's hungry.
Betty, will you put that kitten down before I... Wait a minute, what's that around its neck?
It's an envelope, Mommy. There's something.
An envelope? That's funny. Why should anyone want to... Give me that cat, Betty. I want to see what...
You won't hurt it, Mommy.
Of course not. Why should I? I just want to see what's written on the envelope, that's all. Now give it here.
Yes, Mommy. Here you are.
That's it. Nice kitty. Nice little kitty. Nice. Now let me see. Please inform police that Jerry Dodge and Robert Hale are being held prisoners by Lo Sang-Hu at 63 Vine Street. Send help immediately. It's a matter of life or death. Good heavens! I've got to call a policeman. Betty, you go on upstairs and I'll be back right away. Now you go on.
It must have been shortly after Mrs. Moran found a policeman that Queenie came to the room and said that Mr. Bishop had returned. Mr. Hale tried his best to stall for trying, but, well, he wasn't very successful, and before very long we found ourselves once more face to face with Lo Sang-Hu and Mr. Bishop. As the door was closed.
Well, Mr. Hanlon, Jerry, we meet again. Yeah, that's right, Bishop. We meet again. For the last time. You're pretty sure of that, aren't you? Of course, Mr. Hanlon, of course. You know, Bishop, If I were to be granted one last wish, I think that wish would be for 5 minutes alone with you. There's nothing I'd like better than to grab you by the throat and let you...
Unfortunately, Mr. Hanlon, you are now having less than 5 minutes to live. And in that little time, you... someone wishing to make entrance into humble quarters. Pleased to be seeing who it is, Queenie.
Sure, right away.
You'd better delay this business at hand until Queenie returns, Lo Sanku. One never knows when... What's the matter, Bishop? Losing your nerve? Not at all, Mr. Hanlon, not at all. I'm merely being careful. You'd be surprised, wouldn't you, if the police should happen to walk in? Yes, quite surprised. However, I hardly think... What's that? That confusion, those voices. Can't you guess, Bishop? Can't you guess?
Most very alarming disturbance. Lo Sanku not understanding why.
Get out of here! Get out!
Get him up, all of you! Get him up! That will be a pleasure. Well, there you are, Hale. Thank heavens we made it in time. Well, I suppose this is Jerry.
Hi. I'm pretty good, too.
Well, your dad's waiting for you down at headquarters. He's already reported you missing, but... Oh, but look here. I'm neglecting our friends.
You hear it?
Feeling well, Lo Sanku?
Not very well. Lo Sanku feeling most very unhappy.
Yeah, well, now, that's tough, Lo Sanku. That's plenty tough. But you'll have to get used to it because this is only the beginning.
Most distressing beginning. This beginning of ending. Most very distressing.
Stand by. All junior G-men, stand by. Stand by for thrilling details concerning the next broadcast. Calling all junior G-men. Calling all junior G-men to report at once to points of duty. Calling junior G-man Eddie Martin to report to Director Donald Peterson at the next meeting on this station to give a report concerning the case of the creeping shadow.
Okay, so that's the junior G-men. And as you could see at the end of the show, they teased what the next episode would be. And you heard that Donald Peterson, the creator and director and actor, played the director in the show. So I hope everybody enjoyed a little bit of serialization of the episode of The One-Legged Men.
What year was that, Frank?
1930, let me see here, 1936.
36. Frank, I
Yes.
was very impressed. It was recorded in 1936, that the quality of your transcription was excellent. I didn't hear any clicks or pops from playing a transcription disc. It was certainly clean, and the audio quality was excellent for a program that was that old.
Well, John, as always, I have to thank John Abbott because I send these to John and he cleans them up. He took out some dead space or dead time in a couple of spots and cleans things up. So while it's probably was in decent shape, John makes it better for me and I appreciate it.
Well, thank you, John.
Yeah, absolutely delightful. And I had no idea that was such an old transcription. It really is remarkable. Excellently well done, team Frank and John. Well done. Now, Sally Stevens does not seem to be on the call tonight.
Yeah, I don't know. You didn't see my chat notice.
You know, I saw it, but
yeah, I didn't think she was going to make it. So either you or I could read the questions. Wendy,
no, I'll
whatever
read.
you like.
That's fine. I'm happy to read the questions. I always enjoy taking a whack at them, and I don't have to worry about giving someone permission to share screen. We'll see if it works on my screen.
Right,
but did anyone have any other questions or observations for Frank about his first 15?
I was going to say hello to our guest has now joined us, Steve Darnell.
Yes.
So he down there at the bottom on my screen. So Steve will be with you in a little bit. We have I think I told you, a 10-question quiz. We only go the questions now, and the answers we don't do until after your presentation. So you can hang with us, and maybe you'll enjoy the quiz a little bit too.
Excellent. I shall have my decoder ring at the ready.
Excellent.
Good.
Thank you and welcome, Steve. I saw that you were on the call, but Frank got to greeting you before I did. Frank's very quick with these things, which is wonderful. And thank you for making the time for us tonight, Steve. Meanwhile, this will be a new, no, not, it's the poll. Launch the poll. Launch. Ooh, it let me launch the poll. Yay. Zoom continues to make progress and no longer discriminates against people on tablets. Woohoo! All right. So now I will be a computer. Now, what we do is, for those of you who have access to the screen, you're welcome to put your answers in. You may go more quickly than the computer reading the questions and possible answers, and that's fine. You can skip ahead. You can take all the time you want. I will leave the poll open while Steve makes his presentation and everything. And then after Steve's presentation, we will give you the answers. Now, I'm not a school marm, so I'm not as strict about having your papers and your pens right there in front of you, but I've got my pen, even though I can't take the quiz since I'm reading it. So here we go, a new adventure. This will make you appreciate Sally all the more when she comes back next month. Oh, and someone has already answered the first question. Oh, this is great. All right, sidekicks and constant companions. Question 1. Who would be flying in the cockpit with Captain Midnight? A, Lieutenant Twilight. B, Ichabod Mudd. C, Swifty Stevens. D, Mary Marble. Question 1. Who would be flying in the cockpit with Captain Midnight? A, Lieutenant Twilight. B, Ichabod Mudd. C, Swifty Stevens. D, Mary Marvel. Question 2. The saddle buddy of Tom Mix would be A, Laramie Johnson. B, Patsy Montana. C, Tex Mason. D, Mike Shaw. Question 2. The saddle buddy of Tom Mix would be A, Laramie Johnson. B, Patsy Montana. C, Tex Mason. D, Mike Shaw. Question 3. The juvenile ward of Bruce Wayne was A, Chuck Ramsey. B, Joyce Ryan. C, Dick Grayson. D, Billy Batson. The juvenile ward of Bruce Wayne was A, Chuck Ramsey. B, Joyce Ryan. C, Dick Grayson. D, Billy Batson. Question 4. A ranch hand on the B-Bar B with Bobby Benson was A, Irish. B, Windy. C, Harka. D, all of the above. A ranch hand on the bar B with Bobby Benson was A, Irish, B, windy, C, Harka, D, all of the above. Question 5. Going with Casey, crime photographer, to any assignment was A, Ann Williams, B, Claire Brooks, C, Ethel Burt, D, Helen Asher. Number 5, going with Casey, crime photographer, to any assignment was A, Ann Williams, B, Claire Brooks, C, Ethel Burt, D, Helen Asher. Number 6, riding in the squad car with Dick Tracy was usually A, Mike Clancy, B, Dennis O'Keefe, C, Pat Patton, D, Irish Seater. Number 6, riding in the squad car with Dick Tracy was usually A, Mike Clancy, B, Dennis O'Keefe, C, Pat Patton, D, Irish Setter. Number 7, the female nemesis in Terry and the Pirates was A, Fury Shark, B, Mesquite Molly, C, the Duchess, D, Dragon Lady. The female nemesis in Terry and the Pirates was A, Fury Shark, B, Mesquite Molly, C, the Duchess, D, Dragon Lady. Number 8, who were the young pals of Jack Armstrong? A, Babs and Junior, B, Billy and Betty, C, Penny and Clipper, D, Marjorie and Leroy. 8, who were the young pals of Jack Armstrong? A, Babs and Junior, B, Billy and Betty, C, Penny and Clipper, D, Marjorie and Leroy. Number 9, Hop Harrigan rode the airwaves with A, Tank Tinker, B, Rusty Nail, C, Packy McLeod, D, Pansy Oakley. Hop Harrigan rode the airways with A, Tank Tinker, B, Rusty Nail, C, Packy McLeod, D, Pansy Oakley. Number 10, what were the birth names of Roy Rogers and Dale Evans? A, Travis Plutz and Betty Sue Olson, B, Roy Evans and Dale Rogers. C, Leonard Sly and Francis Smith. D, James Stefanik Jr. and Dolores Miller. 10. What were the birth names of Roy Rogers and Dale Evans? A, Travis Plautz and Betty Sue Olson. B, Roy Evans and Dale Rogers. C, Leonard Sly and Francis Smith. D, James Stefanik Jr. and Dolores Miller. This is the end of the questions, courtesy of our own Jack French. I will keep the poll open. I hope I saw some people were answering, and you can go into the poll. You just go to that extra area and hit poll, and it'll come up for you if you want to answer those questions. And stay tuned for the answers after our presentation by Steve Darnell. I'm not sure I got that right. I did get Rusty Nail right.
Yes, it's Steve.
Okay, thank you. I am going to make you a co-host, so you will be able to share your screen, Steve. And welcome. We're delighted to have you here with us.
Well, thank you, Wendy, and thank you to Frank for inviting me to join you this evening. It's lovely to be here. I see some familiar names and some old friends and some folks who I hope will be new ones. So,
Steve, if I may, I'm going to interrupt you because I have a few words I'd like to tell the group about you before you start.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, Steve discovered the golden age of radio at the age of 12 when his father introduced him to the radio show called Those Were the Days. That show was hosted at the time by Chuck Shaden, a name which many of you are familiar with. Well, now Steve is the host and producer of Those Were the Days on Chicago radio station WDCB. And you can listen to Steve every Saturday afternoon by streaming the show on WDCB.org from 1 p.m. to 5 p.m. Central Time. With Chuck and now Steve, Those Were the Days has been broadcast for more than 35 years. Steve is a writer whose credits include Marvel Comics, the Chicago Tribune, and the National Radio Hall of Fame. Steve is also the publisher of Nostalgia Digest, a magazine dedicated to chronicling the golden age of entertainment. And while he didn't mention it in the background information he provided to me, I know Steve also contributes articles to Nostalgia Digest as I have read them. And you can catch his article on Bob and Ray in the winter 2023 edition of Nostalgia Digest, which, if it's still not available at your Barnes & Noble, you can write to Nostalgia Digest and you can order a copy directly there. And you can also sign up and have, as I now do, have Nostalgia Digest delivered by mail. And also within the digest is a schedule of the programs that Steve plays on Those Were the Days. Now, I spoke to Steve at Mank in September when I purchased my fall edition of Nostalgia Digest, and I didn't realize it was talking to Steve until the next day when I'm reading the digest and saw his photo. Now, we've all had a chance to meet Steve a little bit, and he's going to speak to us on Nostalgia Digest, 5 decades of celebrating entertainment's golden age. So now, Steve, I'll give it back to you, and thank you for being with us.
Well, thank you very much, Frank. Yes, tonight I'm glad for the chance to talk about this publication, partly because it's one that means a great deal to me, but also because, as Frank and I were talking about a subject for this evening, it occurred to me that in a way, the history of our publication sort of mirrors the history of the nostalgia wave, the nostalgia movement. Frank was kind enough to mention Those Were the Days, which is the radio show that Chuck actually began on May 2nd, 1970. So we've actually been celebrating the golden age of radio for coming on 53 years. Chuck was of that generation that had grown up with radio, and as such, didn't necessarily think about the disappearance of the golden age of radio until after it had happened. But in the 1960s, like a lot of people who'd grown up with radio, he found himself missing it, and then discovering that there were people who had collected these shows, who had them on reel-to-reel tape, which was then, of course, the technology. And he began collecting these shows on tape and playing them for friends. And as he used to say, he started to run out of popcorn, so he thought he'd better just host a radio show instead. And so Chuck went on the air at a small Evanston radio station in 1970 with Those Were the Days. And over time, over the first few weeks, he would ask the audience if there were things they wanted to hear. Because that's how you know if you're playing things people want to hear, especially on a new show. And he didn't get a lot of response except for the occasional, play Who's on First, play the Bickersons, things like that. But he still liked the idea of having some sort of organized schedule. And it began with a little pamphlet that Chuck put together and started sending out for free with the help of his sponsor, which was a federal savings and loan in the Chicago area. And that's what one of the early ones looked like, just sort of a little 8.5 by 14 sheet, I think folded into thirds that could go into an envelope. They did, and then inside the schedule for the shows, pretty basic, it might say June 7th, Little Orphan Annie, 1930s, shipwrecked on a desert island. So bare bones, but it did the job. After a couple of years, the sponsor, Northwest Federal Savings, had the idea of publishing Chuck's schedule in their customer newsletter. And of course, the implication being, if you wanted to know what was going to be played on the show, you'd better sign up and get your account with Northwest Federal. And a lot of people did. And that worked all right for a couple of years as well. But as many of you know, as the 1970s went on, America entered something of a nostalgia boom. Shows like Those Were the Days became more popular, and Chuck Shaden became more popular as a host, to the point where he was hosting multiple shows on multiple stations. And to publish the schedule for all those shows would have required a much bigger publication than a newsletter or a brochure like this. So in December of 1974, Chuck had the idea of publishing the Nostalgia Newsletter and Radio Guide. And that is the very first issue there. It was similar in structure to the original pamphlet, except now it was a broadsheet that was folded into thirds to create this sort of 8.5 by 11 appearance. And then that was folded into thirds again, so it would go into envelopes for mailing. In each issue, you'd find a brief description of the show that was going to be played on a given date. Inside, you'd find some tidbits of news that might be relevant in this nostalgia boom. Sometimes it would be, in this case, news about Variety reporting that Republic Pictures serials were being leased out to theaters again, in case people wanted to catch up with Roy Rogers and Gene Autry one more time. There were also occasionally little tidbits from out-of-print magazines, like in this case, the Movie and Radio Guide from 1940. It proved popular enough to where more people who read it began to contribute to it. There were now, over the first year of the Nostalgia Newsletter, people began contributing little articles about film, about music, about collectibles, about comic books, whatever the case might be. And again, between that and the fact that Chuck Shaden was hosting multiple shows, it became apparent that a 6-page newsletter wasn't going to suffice. So in October of 1975, the publication was streamlined a little bit to the 5.5 by 8.5 format that we now know. As you can see, The cover is still a little text heavy. It was not the golden age of typesetting, but that's okay. That came later. But it was a start. And again, a chance to let everybody know developments that were taking place on the show within the community of old time radio and nostalgia. In this case, Chuck talking about the fact that he'd just come back from California and interviewed Carlton E. Morse, the creator of One Man's Family. But again, you look at that cover and it's, to put it charitably, it's not eye-catching. That's okay. 1 month later, we got our first cover, Charlie McCarthy in a Thanksgiving mode in November of 1975. And so was this 16-page magazine, if you want to call it that. I don't know if things have to technically be a certain length before they become magazines, but it worked. It had room for all the shows that Chuck was hosting. It had room for a cover photo and articles on the inside, be they original or reprints. A few months after this cover, February of 1976, marked the first time that those were the days would broadcast on a February the 14th, Jack Benny's birthday. So Jack had to be on the cover. And to date, he's our most frequent cover boy. He has been on, I believe, 17 times. The cover on the right actually is a little mosaic that was created by Joel Bogart. Joel also created the Nostalgia Newsletter logo and the illustration of Chuck and his hall closet that you see at the top of the cover there. Because for many years, Chuck took May as National Radio Month very seriously. And this was just a beautiful illustration that I just wanted to share, and especially appropriate because it was with the May 1976 issue that the digest expanded to 32 pages. So clearly there was room and there was interest in learning more about the past, whether it was through reprints from old magazines that were now out of print, or whether it was from new writers remembering old subjects. Over time, the digest sort of changed and evolved. It went from a 32-page magazine to a 16-page magazine to a 24-page magazine, back to 32 pages. In October of 1980, it became a bi-monthly. And otherwise, the format was not all that dissimilar from the years gone by. But after a couple years, a new innovation opened itself up. A color cover. Now, obviously, most of the subjects covered in Nostalgia Newsletter and Radio Guide were rarely, if ever, photographed in color. So that was not going to be a big issue, but still a chance to put a little bit of color into what had literally been a black and white publication up to this point. All these things were a start. At this point, the magazine's 32 pages. A lot of those radio shows Chuck had hosted were gone, but he was hosting other shows in addition to Those Were the Days, like the Radio Theater on WAIT. But the fact is that when you get to 32 pages, it's really hard to justify calling yourself a newsletter. So 1 year later, with the October-November 1983 issue, you became the Nostalgia Digest and Radio Guide for the very first time. And again, still a mix of original articles and reprints. And that continued to be the case for another several years, but until the June-July 1988 issue. And there it is with Art Linkletter on the cover. This was something of a groundbreaking effort because it marked the first time in what was then the 14-year history of this publication that it relied entirely on original material. And we were very fortunate, Chuck and myself as publishers, in that there was a lot of interest in writing about the past, but it also indicated the strength of a publication like this, and in the hands of Chuck Shaden, the original publisher, who realized early on nostalgia is a very broad umbrella. And it's great to have articles about the golden age of radio, just as it's great to have articles about the golden age of Hollywood, or the golden age of early television, or perhaps some first-person recollection of what it was like to be alive during this time. All those things had merit, and all of them had a place in the Nostalgia Digest. A few years later, with the June-July 1993 issue, Nostalgia Digest got a new writer. Modesty precludes me from mentioning him by name, but Frank was kind enough to do so, and in a way that's very appropriate, given the article that he was talking about, because it was in this issue that yours truly made his first appearance in the digest with a story about Bob and Ray. Yes. Now, I have a little backstory here, because some of you, I think, are like me, of an age where you came around after the golden age of radio had concluded. And I'm sure for all of us who were not there for it, we all have someone or something that got us into it, something that was our gateway drug, as it were. For me, of course, it was hearing Chuck Shaden hosting Those Were the Days and presenting shows like Fibber McGee and Molly and Vic and Sade and The Great Gildersleeve and Suspense and X-1. But there was something so unique about Bob and Ray, and in a way so contemporary, you know, because we've talked about Bob and Ray many times over the years, and we will do so on our radio show later this month. But I always think of the famous quote by Kurt Vonnegut, to the extent that Bob and Ray's humor is timeless because it's rooted in that age-old dilemma of how to seem lusty and purposeful when less than nothing is going on. You know, Bob and Ray were comedians who had grown up listening to radio, and so they knew enough about radio to where they could make fun of it because they knew the vocabulary inside and out. The postscript to this particular story of the June-July 1993 issue is that I had gotten an address for Bob Elliott's representative. Ray Goulding had passed away by this time, but I sent a copy to Bob asking if he might consider signing it, and also, of course, let me know if there was anything that was inaccurate about it. And he wrote back, bless his heart, to say that he not only didn't see any mistakes, but he also saw several things that he'd forgotten about. And I'm reminded of that old adage, you know, the joke about if you remember the 1960s, it means you weren't there. But I also realized too that the people who did this work during the golden age of radio, they weren't necessarily the ones keeping records. We have subsequent generations of historians to thank for that. Any case, the digest continued as a 32-page bi-monthly, and then eventually became a 48-page bi-monthly. But in the spring of 2003, 20 years ago now, my goodness, the magazine made one more big change to a 64-page quarterly. So it would come out winter, spring, summer, and autumn. Again, at this point, nearly entirely relying on original articles, but that meant there were enough articles to fill 64 pages. And of course, still have room for the schedule to Those Were the Days, which Chuck continued to publish every week. In the fall of 2004, Chuck was approaching, Chuck had just turned 70, as a matter of fact. I don't think he'll mind me saying that. Or as we call it, 39. And he was in a position where he wanted to sort of cut back on his workload. So he approached yours truly about the possibility of taking over as the editor and publisher of the magazine that he had started 30 years earlier. And in my case, I thought about it for about a day. And the more I thought about it, the more I realized if you say no, and he finds someone else, and you don't like what they've done, you're going to hate yourself the rest of your life. And I frankly wasn't prepared to do that. So I agreed that I would take over as publisher of the digest with the summer 2005 issue. Luckily, had a good cover story to put out. And of course, we would continue to include the schedule for Those Were the Days, because that's, for many people, that's the reason they bought this publication or subscribed to it. At the same time, I realized that I was coming to this, as we said earlier, to come from the generation after those who grew up listening to the golden age of radio, and again, some of you are of this generation, some of you are perhaps my age, and some of you are younger, which is great. But I suspect that those who are my age or younger probably did the same thing I did, which is you grow up not only appreciating the sounds of the golden age of radio, but also to some degree the sounds of your contemporaries. I always say, and I'm only half joking when I say 1977 was a watershed year for me, because it's the year I first heard Those Were the Days, and it's the year I first heard punk rock. Those two don't have a lot in common, I acknowledge that, although one of them taught me not to disregard the past, and the other taught me not to disregard the future. And those were both valuable lessons. So coming to the digest from my generational perspective, I had the idea that it would be great to find the things where we could bridge the generations, not necessarily to become a magazine about baby boomer stuff. There are already enough magazines that will cover the Beatles and Woodstock and, Elton John and the French Connection and whatever else. But maybe find a way to ensure that the past has some relevance to the present. And I was very lucky with my first issue to have support from some very talented people, including a great friend and one of the greatest writers radio ever produced, a man named Norman Corwin. Norman was kind enough to write a few hundred words about a show he had done 60 years earlier when he was a mere stripling of 31, a show called 14 August, which was broadcast on VJ Day to commemorate the end of the Second World War. Well, he was good enough to write a few hundred words about that, and funny story, I think. Afterwards, we sent out a check along with some complimentary copies because we did that for all of our contributing writers. Norman lived another 6 years, and I don't think he ever cashed the check. That was as sweet a gesture as him actually contributing something in the first place. So I was really grateful for that. And of course, we also had a chance to write about people who had a connection to the past, even if it wasn't quite the connection we'd envisioned, like Wanda Jackson. Wanda Jackson, for those of you who don't know, was nicknamed the First Lady of Rockabilly because as the article began, it began with a warning saying, this article contains rock and roll. Wanda Jackson had been a country and Western singer and worked in radio regionally. And then she was on tour with this 19-year-old named Elvis Presley, who told her she had a great voice for rock and roll if she ever decided to go that route. And if you've never heard Wanda Jackson singing rock and roll in the 1950s, get those recordings. They are incendiary. Anyway, it was a great way to start. And over my first year as the publisher, I was still trying to find interesting ways to bridge the past and the present. There was a songwriter I admired tremendously named Elvis Costello, who had written an essay some years earlier about Frank Sinatra. And we got the okay to reprint that in our autumn 2005 issue. And then in 2006, I realized that there was an anniversary coming up. It was the 60th anniversary of the time that Bob Elliott and Ray Goulding first met at a radio station in Boston, WHDH. And I had this mad idea that it would be great to interview Bob Elliott. I say a mad idea because I wrote to Bob Elliott's representatives. I realized Bob Elliott had more or less retired, and he hadn't done any interviews in about 15 years. So the representative gave me Bob's address, suggested, hey, if you want to send him a letter, put a couple copies of your magazine in the mail, that's fine. But the implication was you're just going to get a direct rejection rather than an implied rejection. Well, you've probably guessed I wouldn't be telling this story if he'd said no. So, and one of my favorite memories of this time is that we'd arranged to talk with Bob Elliott on the phone. And earlier that day, I had called the representative's office to say, hey, I've got this interview with Bob in an hour, and I'm wondering if you can fax over this document, this short bio, I remember. And the secretary said, "You're doing what?" So nice to scoop Bob Elliott's representative too. And that was how we celebrated my first year at the helm of Nostalgia Digest, with the first interview Bob Elliott had done in some 15 years. Over time, Bob Elliott became a good friend to our magazine and to Those Were the Days, and we'll talk more about that later. But one of the things that I'd been told when I took over as the publisher was that Nostalgia Digest, in all the years the previous man had been publishing it, had never been marketed. And I thought, well, I think this magazine could be bigger than it is, could be better known than it is. I mean, I've only been in the job a year, but you know, it had a reputation from the previous guy. So that fall, we signed up with a distributor for the first time in our 32-year history. And that was the cover that greeted people for the first time from magazine racks. Well, I want to say across the country. I'm not sure it was quite that complete, but it was the first time we'd gotten into stores without my having to drive the magazine to the store. And that was a huge thing. Over the next couple of years, we signed up with Ingram Distributors. And at this point, the Digest is in about 300 to 400 stores nationwide, including a lot of Barnes & Noble stores and a lot of Books A Million stores. And I was very pleased to see the recent news that Barnes & Noble is apparently opening new stores, which is great. But at the same time, as I realized now we had a magazine that was in stores and a magazine that could really, you know, cover the gap between one generation and the next. But there was one ambition still I had not fulfilled. And I've always, every time I'd ever worked at a magazine, and I'd worked at a comic book publication, I had worked at a medical publication, but I'd always joke about the swimsuit issue. Well, in 2007, I decided the joke was over and it was time to do a swimsuit issue. And so we got this beautiful cover of Marilyn Monroe. Inside there were a dozen pages or so of different stars dressed for the beach. It was, I'm happy to say, a co-ed effort. So you'd find photos of glamorous people like Betty Hutton and Mary Tyler Moore and Betty Grable, of course. But you'd also find photos of Ish Kabibble or Douglas Fairbanks Jr. And it proved popular enough to where we did it again. Actually, we've done 5 swimsuit issues as of this time. Over the years, we've parceled them out. As you can imagine, when you're on a quarterly publication, you don't want to hit people over the head by doing the same thing every year. But every 3 to 4 years, we did a new swimsuit issue. And in fact, there'll be a new swimsuit issue coming out this summer. And then let's see, I guess the next big thing for us was in early 2009. I had just had the chance to, you know, we talked about Bob Elliott's first interview in 15 years. As it happens, I was on hand for one of the last interviews with Les Paul, who was gracious enough to speak with me for our magazine at the end of 2008. And I say gracious because, let's face it, Les Paul was 93 years old. He was world renowned as both a musician and as a technological wunderkind. He didn't need any help from me to be better known. But somehow we were on the phone for about 90 minutes talking about Les Paul and his career and his time in radio, his time in Chicago when he played on the National Barn Dance Show, or at WJJD, where he was under the name Rhubarb Red. And it was just a remarkable time. I think eventually I had to leave for dinner, which is the only reason we stopped. But this issue also coincided with another big development. Chuck Shaden at this point was about to turn 75. He'd been hosting Those Were the Days for 39 years. And all of you who are fans of radio know that 39 is a perfect number at which to stop. So Chuck reached out to me and he said, you know, I've decided at the end of June, I'm going to retire, and those were the days will end. And of course, I was agog for a number of reasons, not the least of which I was a huge fan of the show, but also because we'd sort of grown to rely on having 8 pages of every issue include the schedule for those were the days. And somewhere I found a voice inside me that said, I guess then I'll just have to start my own show. And Chuck was a little surprised. That was not the response he expected to hear. But we began to talk about the possibility of, if you want to extend a bad metaphor, we decided Chuck didn't necessarily have to end the party. We would just move the party to my house. And in July of 2009, I was proud to become the second full-time host and producer of Those Were the Days. And again, it was a chance to share these marvelous sounds and also hopefully share them in a way that would make it possible for listeners to understand how much these things meant to me. One of the things that had always been a part of Those Were the Days were the interviews. You know, from the 1970s onward, Chuck interviewed dozens, hundreds of people who had a connection to the golden age of radio, from actors to big stars like Jack Benny or Eve Arden or Don Amici, to supporting players like Elliot Lewis or announcer Harry Von Zell, to the sound effects people, to the writers like Arch Obler and Norman Corwin. Well, this was a tradition we wanted to continue if we could. Of course, by 2009, as you know, there were a lot fewer radio professionals left. But we managed to get our microphone out to the West Coast a couple of times and speak with a few of them, including a lovely woman named Marcia Hunt, who at the time was 92 years old and still sharp and still full of great stories about her career. We just lost her fairly recently this last fall. And it was in the course of talking about these interviews that a friend said, you know, it seems like you could spend a couple of pages in the digest and use that to promote the fact that you're sharing interviews on the air. So in October of 2010, we began a feature called A Few Moments With, where we excerpted the interviews that we were going to feature on the show, and the schedule for those shows, of course, being published in those issues. This is something we did over the course every issue for 10 years. And then a year later, we picked it up. So this lasted for 44 issues. And over that time, it was a great excuse to keep interviewing people like Bob Elliott and Rose Marie and Jane Powell and Carl Reiner and Dick Cavett and a young, well, I say young, a fellow who started out in radio as a child named Harry Shearer. And we had great conversations with these people. And like I say, the chance to share an excerpt from these conversations and then tell listeners, tune in October 16th and you'll hear the whole thing. That was a great thing for us. Now, speaking of big things, this is the cover of the autumn 2020 issue, which was the 100th anniversary of radio issue. Really pleased with this. Some of you may know that many years ago in the 1930s, Forbes magazine did a terrific, very famous cover illustration about radio, featuring dozens of faces of radio stars. Well, we didn't have the chance to pay for that, but we got our friend Mark Brown to do the next best thing, which was to do this cover, which has about 31 stars. And if you enlarge it, you can probably see, you'll be able to make out some of them at least. But starting with Eve Arden and ending with Fred Allen, and in between, there's Jack Benny and Groucho Marx and Fibber McGee and Molly and Edgar Bergen and Bob and Ray and Benny Goodman and many, many others. Now, by this time, of course, we were in the midst of the pandemic. Some of you know that postage was going up, printing was going up, and it became necessary for us to raise our subscription rates. And, you know, any publisher will tell you, you hate to do that just to do it. And we thought, what can we do that would perhaps soften the blow of having to hike the price? Well, We decided with the winter 2022 issue that subscribers would receive both the print version of the digest and, for the very first time, a digital version of the digest. And this turned out to be great fun to do. I'm not sure, I won't predict that it got us more or less subscribers, but one byproduct of it is that we were able to take back issues that had long been sold out and digitize those, like this one with Bob and Ray on the cover, and make them available as PDFs for people who thought, gee, I'd love this magazine. I'm just sorry I missed the issues from 8 years ago. That's okay. And we're pleased to announce that the digest continues with this spring 2023 issue with Eve Arden on the cover. And inside there's an article commemorating the 80th anniversary of Sorry, Wrong Number. There's an article about the golden age of singing cowboys. There's an article about juvenile delinquency movies of World War II. There's also a tribute to a dear friend of ours, a man who was the announcer on Those Were the Days for many years, a man named Ken Alexander. If you were familiar with our radio show, you know Ken Alexander. So it's still always been the same goal, which is to prove that nostalgia is a very broad umbrella. And there's room for a lot of memories, whether they come from radio, or they come from movies, whether they come from early television, whether they come from music or anything else, you know. It's a chance to share these stories. It's a chance to share them with people who maybe remember them for the first time around, but just as importantly, to maybe remind people of why they were important. And I suppose I should go all the way and, you know, what is the saying? The Lord hypes those who hype themselves. So Frank alluded to this, that yes, the magazine is available for purchase. As we mentioned, it's in stores across the country, but if you'd like to go directly to the source and get the new issue or any back issues, you can do so at nostalgiadigest.com. That's our website. I'm holding up there. I can't see. There it is in 36-point type on these bookmarks that I had printed out. And I'm just sorry I don't have enough bookmarks to pass around, but it's still great fun. I've been at the helm now for 18 years, and it has gone quickly. And that's why I'm so grateful for the chance to share these stories, but I'm so grateful to Frank and Wendy and everybody for allowing me to come here and talk about the magazine that has meant so much to me. So thank you all for listening. And I will look forward to hearing the answers to tonight's quiz, and hopefully if you are near the computer tomorrow, join me at wdcb.org. Those Were the Days we'll have a Claudette Colbert quintuple feature. 5 radio versions of movies that Claudette Colbert made. So there we go. Wendy, I'll throw it back to you. Thank you so much.
Thank you very, very much, Steve. That was really a wonderful and engaging presentation. I put the address you mentioned, nostalgiadigest.com, in the chat feature. So those of you who have access, you know, to the video, we've got it now in a couple of different chats. So please check that. In fact, you can usually tap on something in the chat and it'll bring up whatever page, and then you can come back to this page. Depending on what device you're using, it probably wouldn't work on the phone. I just love, I'm in awe of the fact that you were so, you thought creatively, Steve, and managed to find bridges from the past to the present and just keep your focus going forward, always, 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 in publishing, as the whole industry has been changing and shifting and morphing into new and different things. And you know, I'm also kind of relieved that you didn't say, and we hit our stride on Facebook.
Oh.
Thank you for that. Does anyone have any questions or curiosities, observations for Steve?
I have.
Joni, you have your hand up, Joni Leonard.
I don't know how to do this.
Oh.
What?
I hear somebody, so,
Steve, I've got a huge number of the digests that SPURDVEC has had. And right now, I'm in the middle of digitizing all of the scripts, and I've got over 4,500 of them. And I'm about a little over halfway done. And that digest was one of the things that was pinned on my clipboard to get to. But if you've already done that and there's a way we can purchase those or something like that, so I wouldn't be doing double duty. Are all of them digitized?
Not all of them. We have digitized back issues going back to 2014, which in terms of my tenure as publisher still leaves us about 8 years worth to go, about 35 issues, somewhere in there. So the plan is to eventually digitize them all. It's sort of one byproduct of all this I'm finding, of course, is that when you start publishing a magazine in 2005 and then in 2022 you have the idea to digitize it, you have to make sure you still have all the software you were using in 2005 so you can open those issues again. But yeah, I mean, because it's been something of a one-man operation. But yeah, the plan is to eventually digitize them all. But right now, like I say, we've digitized about 8 years worth of back issues. And, now that if I do the math, that's still about 1,800 pages of reading material. So if we go with all those, congratulations on digitizing scripts for SPURDVEC. That's a Herculean undertaking and one that's, I think, very important and worthwhile.
And they're digitized in 300 dBi in color.
Beautiful.
I've had other people helping me, but I ask them not, I have that criteria because that's what I'm trying to do. They'll run them through these computer or I'm losing it here, but they would use printer feeders. And,
sure.
And these, especially the older scripts, they won't take any abuse at all. In fact, I've even asked them not to even straighten out the corners that are bent because they just flop right off.
Oh God, yes. Oh God, I know. I'm just picturing that as you say it. Yes.
Yeah, and I'm loving it. And in fact, I just finished half a dozen theater guilds today. But I've got a storage unit here full of SPURDVEC magazines, not only the digest but other ones.
Well, I've been a member of SPURDVEC since the 90s, and in fact, Chuck Shaden told me about them, and they do wonderful work, and I do enjoy the radiogram that they send out every month. I'm also pleased that we've never been in direct conflict in the sense of it's really the thing I found in a field such as this is there's no rivalry, which I think is really great. It's sort of like SPURDVEC does an amazing job. I've known there have been other organizations like SPURDVEC in terms of preserving shows and publishing newsletters and whatnot. And the fact is, it's great that people are doing it, and whether this one is, more readable than this one, or this one's, got more features, whatever the case may be, it's just great to know that there's so many people making these efforts to preserve things. I think by comparison, the digest that we publish, it's a little more of an omnibus. So we're not necessarily in a position to publish, 5 articles in one magazine about the golden age of radio, tempting as it might be, but you get a couple in there. And hopefully in turn, that allows us to, if we feature an article about yours truly, Johnny Dollar, and then we can say, hey, by the way, on our show, we're featuring a yours truly, Joni Eller program, and it's all in that one issue. So yes, I would like to think we could be the gateway drug to places like SPURDVAC, and maybe have people, if we can convince somebody that this is worth learning more about, and they come to SPURDVAC, I'd be very happy.
Well, it's when we started this in 1974, SPURDVAC we were all interested in old time radio, but it was started as a preservation society. And here we are almost 50 years later, just now getting started with it. And it's really a shame. Everybody's got their own ideal. The radiogram is the foundation of SPURDVAC right now. And Patrick does a fantastic job.
He does.
But as with all of us, we're getting just a tad older, and there's more ahead of us than behind us. So I don't think we'll ever catch up, but I'm going to get this script library finished this year some way or another, and then we will have a fabulous library preserved. And there's so many things that it would be nice to have them digitized, and organizations like ours and yours that have been around for a long time have stuff, just a ton of stuff. And
I know that's stuff.
By digitizing them, at least they'll be readily available to a lot more people anyway. And you don't have to dig out a big file box and shuffle through it, finding something.
I was going to say, and live in mortal terror of turning the pages. Yeah,
absolutely. So
well,
we've got 2 storage units in Los Angeles filled with transcription discs sitting there deteriorating as we speak, and it sends chills down my spine that they're not being done.
Yeah, I'm sorry for that, but
yes. But the scripts will be done, and in fact, I've made contact, I think, with someone here a couple of years ago to trade with your library. Right now, I'm concentrating on getting this one finished this year, and I probably have more that I haven't even opened boxes of. So it'll be available to anybody that wants, people that want to do recreations or whatever. Or like I say, you ask somebody, have you ever read a good radio show? Some of these scripts are fabulous. You see the marks on the people. They're playing tit-tat-toe or doing.
I was going to say what you do when you're off mic for 4 pages. Yeah.
Right.
In fact,
if you see a little things written on there, they've got 2 or 3 pages before they got another.
That's right. I would like to, along those lines, I'd love to invite everybody. I mean, obviously, to listen to those were the days, Saturday afternoons or Saturday mornings, depending on if you're East or West Coast. But the end of April will mark our 53rd anniversary on the air, and we're going to be featuring something that was a long time coming because we'd planned to do it for our 50th anniversary. That was in 2020. Guess what happened? So 2 years later, we finally got to host our 50th anniversary show. And just in time for the 53rd anniversary, we're going to be playing a recreation we did of The Undecided Molecule by Norman Corwin. Great cast. Rich Coase, better known as Svengoolie, played the role of the judge. Jim O'Hare from the series Parks and Recreation was in on this. A couple of people from Mystery Science Theater 3000. Just a great group of people. And so yes, if you want to hear, it's a chance to hear a recreation, which those don't get played on the radio too often. So I invite everyone to tune into that show on the 29th of April. And of course, all the Saturdays between now and then too.
Thank you, Steve. Now, Joni Leonard has very patiently had her
Yes.
hand up for a while. Joni, did you have a question or an observation for Steve?
I have an observation for Steve. Steve, I love Those Were the Days.
Well, thank
And
you.
I'm an old-time radio junkie. So I listen to a great deal. Can you hear me?
I can, yeah,
Yes.
thank you. Oh, you
Loud and clear.
Yeah, you sound great. I would love to. Thank you. No, I'm so thrilled to hear that.
And my heart broke when Ken Alexander left us.
Oh.
I just loved him, still do. And he was such a great part of Those Were the Days. And he was so funny and so good. And the different things that he would make up songs for. And I just thought he was a fantastic, really, really nice person. And you just got such good feelings when you heard Ken on Those Were the Days. And I knew that, you know, he was getting older, as we all are. And when he passed, I got so upset. I really did. And I know a lot of people that did. So, and I'm a person that's blind, and I have a lot of blind friends that love old-time radio. And lots of times on a Saturday night, we'll get together and say, "Did you hear Those Were the Days? It was so good today."
Oh,
and
thank
Steve
you.
is so good. So thank you, Steve.
Thank you, Joni. And I can tell you, Ken Alexander was a lovely man, and I think I can speak for both Chuck Shaden and myself when I say he made better broadcasters out of us, just by example. We were also very sad to hear about Ken's passing, of course, because Ken had been a part of our show off and on for about 35 years. That said, you know, looking back at how beloved he was and how popular he was, and the fact that he got to do the thing he loved right up to the very end, it was hard to be truly sad, because we just felt such joy that we'd gotten to spend our time with him, you know, and he, I think in turn, as somebody said, you know, Ken was 93 when he passed away. He could have retired many times over, you know, when he left one station in the 80s, he could have retired when the classical music station he worked for was sold. He could have retired when I took over the show in 2009, but he stayed with it because he loved radio that much. And we grew to love him a lot too. And I was really, you know, I appreciate your kind words. And in fact, there is as I mentioned, a tribute to Ken in the new spring issue of the Digest. And some of you, hopefully, Joni, you got to hear the show we did about Ken last November.
You know, it's a funny thing because I record your shows every week.
Mm-hmm.
And I had been doing some other things, and I was not aware of Ken's death.
Hmm.
And one of my friends told me about it because I recorded the show, I think it was November 5th, and I never had gotten to listen to it. And then I sort of lost it, but then I found it again. So I do, thank goodness, I have it recorded. But lots of times I record things on a machine that I have called the Victor Stream, and I just put the recorder on, and I'm in Arizona, so I listen from, it's from 12 to 4.
12 to 4, right, sure.
And of course, with daylight time, we don't have daylight time here in Arizona, but we are forced to go back an hour when everybody's going forward an hour. So we're on Pacific. We will be on Pacific time after Sunday.
Wow.
But anyway.
Yes, thank you.
Well, thank you, Steve, and I'm looking forward to every week listening to Those Were the Days.
Thank you.
Thank you, Joni. Bert, you had your hand up, and then Chuck, Niren, and then John Reiser. Take it away, Bert.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, Steve, I must confess that I've read Nostalgia Digest now and then over the years, but it's been a while since I've actually picked up a copy, and I finally just started subscribing with the winter Bob and Ray issue.
Oh, great.
And I'm very impressed with the quality of the publication, and just keep up the good work. And while I've got you, I guess I need to pay tribute here to Chuck Shaden, if I could, please, because he got me interested in old time radio. By chance, on my car radio one night, I tuned into his program when he was still on WBBM, and I was hooked. Thank you again. Keep up the good work.
Thank you. Yeah, the Golden Age of Radio does that, and Chuck was as good a spokesman as you could ask for. So thank you, Bert. I appreciate that.
Steve,
yes,
I've got a real quick question and a comment. Have you got a digital index on the internet for all your books that you've got posted or not?
No,
Okay.
no, haven't done that yet. You know, we do keep fairly good records of what went into every issue. So in the sense of, if somebody says, gosh, when's the last time Marlene Dietrich was on the cover? We can look that up. But I will say too that all the back issues we've kept, that we have made available through digital format, those are accompanied by descriptions of each issue. I will also say too, at the Nostalgia Digest website, there's an archives page, because I believe it was the Old Time Radio Researchers Group, I don't remember, who scanned all of the issues Chuck published. So in the sense, yeah, we've got close to 40 years of the magazine available in one format or another. And yeah, it's been difficult to come up with a key that we could share with anybody, but not out of the question, I suppose.
The comment is, I had the distinct pleasure of going to Mr. Shaden's store in Chicago when he had that. And I felt when I walked in, I felt like this is radio heaven. I mean,
yes,
I
the
found
Metro Golden Memories store. Yes,
I found a Breakfast Club 20th anniversary program, which I didn't think I'd ever put my hands on. I'd heard about it, and also he had some terrific CDs of Chicago big bands. You're probably familiar with that. He had a lot of that.
Sure.
I didn't have enough money to buy it.
I know.
Anyway,
Well,
I appreciate your presentation tonight. It was just wonderful.
thank you very much. Well, and yes, I mean, it's funny. We talked about the digital reach. You know, one of the things about the digest that always made me, that in retrospect kind of makes me smile, back in the 80s and early 90s, that Chuck would receive letters from people who were saying, oh, you know, we're just heartsick, we're retiring and we're moving to Florida and we'll never hear your radio show again. It's like, oh, if you only knew. Hold that thought for the next 8 years, but you'll be coming. And my God, yeah, the fact that we're all sitting here, I'm in Chicago and some of you are in Washington and some of you are points west. I mean, it's incredible. So, and I know there's one other question, I think, right?
Yes, John Reiser had a question or observation, and I think Frank also has one. But go ahead, John.
Well, Steve, thank you so much for your wonderful presentation. I'm a member of the Association of Recorded Sound Collectors, which is an organization of, well, professional librarians mostly, and serious collectors of all types of recordings, including very active members from the Library of Congress here.
Wonderful.
But you may be familiar with that organization, but one of the things that we're constantly running into, of course, is the issue of copyright. And I was thinking as you were speaking, you must have a wonderful copyright attorney because I wondered if you had run into issues of copyright and how you've been managed to handle that, and just might comment on it. But I know that that's a major issue of orphan recordings, which they can't find the owners of the copyright, and they can't reproduce them, they can't publish them. And I just wondered if you've had a lot of issues with that particular problem with a lot of the program, both the material that you run into or wanted to use.
To tell you the truth, John, no, we have not. I don't know whether that's because we're a very small fish in the big pond of radio. The fact of the matter is that, yeah, we've had very little run-ins with anybody who said, "How dare you air this show because it's copyrighted." I think so I'm afraid I can't offer any advice in that regard. That said, I hope none of you squeal on me. No, we've been very lucky, and like I say, I think, I can't say for sure whether it's that or the fact we're on a public radio station. Whatever the case may be, I'm quite happy to have avoided those discussions. And that said, if somebody really needs me to engage in one, I'm quite happy to do that as well.
Steve, I had a question.
Yes, Frank.
In reading the digest, I can see you offer, an outlet for a lot of younger people who are interested in nostalgia. And I'm just curious as to how you go about, do you recruit these people? Do they just send you material? How do you get these younger writers in particular to take part?
For the most part, the writers reach out to us, which is very gratifying, because that means that they've somehow, it means most of them have seen the publication. I can still sort of tell when a writer contacts us out of the blue who has never actually read the publication, and it's maddening as hell, but because it's everywhere, it's sort of like showing up at a restaurant, thinking, not knowing what they serve. But it's been very gratifying, because we've heard from people who've written for other publications. We've heard from people who publish their own blogs. And I think we've been very fortunate for the fact that we've gotten into stores and we've gotten an internet presence to where somebody can learn about what we do and maybe ask if there's room in there for an article about, say, the comedy team of Clark and McCullough, or an article about Eve Arden or Lionel Barrymore or Singing Cowboys. Chuck Shaden cultivated a good relationship with a lot of writers over the years, and some of them are still writing for us 20 years later. And then, as you point out, we've been lucky to meet folks from all different avenues. We've had writers from Australia and England, and of course, in Canada and from out the United States. And I think it comes back to what I was saying earlier, that this was a publication that had room for all sorts of different stories, that someone who loves films and doesn't know anything about radio, they can write for us. Somebody who knows radio and loves it backwards and forwards and doesn't know anything about films, they're welcome as well, so we've been very lucky in that we haven't had to necessarily reach out to people and say, "Hey, you want to come write for us?" Because when you have someone who is coming to you, I think it's gratifying not only in terms of what it means for the magazine, but also what it means for the writer, because they're coming here saying, "Oh my God, this is a place where I can write that article about Edgar Bergen and Charlie McCarthy. Please let me write that article." And when you've got that level of enthusiasm, it's a winning situation all the way around.
And I read that article. She did a great job.
Yeah, I thought so too. And
Steve, thank you so much for being with us tonight. I really appreciate it.
Oh gosh, Frank, thank you for the invitation, and thanks to all of you who were kind enough to let me reschedule from last January. Circumstances very much beyond my control. But this has just been a lovely evening. And Wendy and Frank, thank you both for allowing me to be a part of it.
Well, thank you. It is just wonderful. And I suspect you will be getting some contacts from some of the people who are here tonight if they don't already subscribe to Nostalgia Digest. So that is, it's really wonderful. And I really appreciate you sort of taking it back to the very beginning, with the focus on radio, because sometimes we get people who are more focused on film or television, and that's fascinating and wonderful and great and interesting. But there are a lot of people who are going, but where was the radio?
Yeah.
Cannot say that about your presentation. I appreciate it.
Well, thank you. Yeah, radio is what started all this rolling for us 50 odd years ago, and yeah, we'll never lose sight of the fact that it was a radio show. It's like, to paraphrase Walt Disney, let us never forget it was a radio show that got us here. So,
yeah, there you go.
But thank you all. This has just been a lovely time, and I know my wife is telling me that dinner is coming up shortly. So, she's been very patient and listened to me palaver on here. But I know, and I did answer all the questions on the quiz. So if you want to mail me my prize, that's fine.
Oh, there you go. No problem at all. Yeah, and you can, if you want to hear them, John Abbott gets this portion of the meeting up on YouTube very quickly. So by the end of the weekend, probably, it will be up there. So if you want to know what the actual answers are, you can, fast forward through all the other stuff.
That's true.
But
Skip
on the other hand,
the
if
part
you
where
don't
I'm talking.
like what you said, you can go and revisit that too.
Lovely. Lovely. Well, thank you again. This has just been a great time. And thanks to all of you for all you're doing to keep the golden age of radio alive, because, this is for none of us, is this a one-person job? The fact that there are communities like this one make it all the more special and all the more valuable. And so thank you. And thanks for listening, everyone. Have a great night.
Thank you, Steve. Bon appetit. All right. So we have, that was just wonderful, Frank. Once again, hats off for finding such a wonderful speaker for us. It was really great stuff. Let me see if I can bring this poll up.
He was very apologetic about January and just, look forward to being with us tonight. And, I thought it was a terrific presentation.
Very good.
Yeah, I did too. I thought it was really outstanding. And judging from the enthusiastic response of so many people tonight, I think it was very successful. So without further ado, we will go to the answers section of the poll, get the poll results. So question 1, who would be flying in the cockpit with Captain Midnight? Was it A, Lieutenant Twilight? 3 of you seem to think so. B, Ichabod Mudd. 35% of you thought that it was he. C,
the poll.
Swifty Stevens. With
Wendy, can you display the poll?
The poll, we're not seeing the poll.
It's go to it's up on my screen. Let me see what the poll is still up. If you go to polls in that sort of extra section that says more or has 3 dots. Well, I will close it and then try launching it again. Maybe that will help all of you. Well, it as far as I know, it's up. Well, let me put.
It's up on polls.
It's up on polls.
Yeah.
Did all of you find that?
No.
Because I didn't. Well, I'll end it and restart it. Maybe that will. Okay. Share results.
There it is. I see it now.
You got it? Yay, thank you for, yeah, clearly I have not mastered this portion of the technology, and I do apologize. This is all very much by the seat of my pants. So question 1, who would be flying in the cockpit with Captain Midnight? A, Lieutenant Twilight, B, Ichabod Mudd, C, Swifty Stevens, who was the odds-on favorite, and D, Mary Marvel. And the answer was B, Ichabod Mudd. So congratulations to the basically a little more than 1/3 of you who got that answer right. On to question 2. The saddle buddy of Tom Mix would be A, Laramie Johnson, B, Patsy Montana, C, Tex Mason, and D, Mike Shaw. And the answer, Mike Shaw, A and D were a complete tie, but Mike Shaw was the correct answer. Now, number 3. The juvenile ward of Bruce Wayne was, and only one person was fooled in that question. The one person thought it was Chuck Ramsey, but in fact it was Dick Grayson. Joyce Ryan and Billy Batson did not rate at all. Not one vote for either of them. So, number 4, a ranch hand on the B-Bar B with Bobby Benson was A, Irish, B, Windy, C, Harka, and D, all of the above. Nobody went for Harka. 2 of you thought it was Irish, 5 thought it was Windy, but most of you were pretty smart and figured out it was all of the above. So there were probably no wrong answers on that one. I mean, you'd get partial credit if you listed one of the others anyway. Number 5, going with Casey crime photographer to any assignment was A, Ann Williams, B, Claire Brooks, C, Ethelbert, and D, Helen Asher. And a few of you got a little sidetracked, but the majority of you were solidly of the opinion it was A, Ann Williams, and you were correct. Number 6. Riding in the squad car with Dick Tracy was usually A, Mike Clancy, B, although I didn't put the B into the poll, Dennis O'Keefe, C, Pat Patton, and D, Irish Setter. And boy, Jack, thanks for that one. You broke me. You broke me. Most of you thought it was C, Pat Patton, and you were right. A couple of you went for Dennis O'Keefe, a fine name, and 6 of you went for Mike Clancy. So it was a pretty clear cut, and nobody chose Irish Setter. Woof. Number 7. The female nemesis in Terry and the Pirates was A, Fury Shark, B, Mesquite Molly, C, the Duchess, and D, Dragon Lady. 71% of you thought it was Dragon Lady, which of course was just, I mean, that evokes such wonderful images. And in fact, that's who it was. The Duchess came in second, and I don't blame you. That's pretty, could be pretty domineering. And, you know, just one each went for Fury Shark and Mesquite Molly. Number 8, who were the young pals of Jack Armstrong? A, Babson Jr., B, Billy and Betty, C, Penny and Clipper, and D, Marjorie and Leroy. Well, nobody went for Babson Jr. One went for Marjorie and Leroy, and Penny Clipper did pretty respectably, as did Billy and Betty, but the correct answer was Billy and Betty, letter B. Number 9, Hop Harrigan rode the airwaves with A, Tank Tinker. Don't try to say that one too fast. You might get tongue-tied. B, Rusty Nail. Wonder if he was a tall drink of water. C, Packy McLeod. And D, Pansy Oakley. And 1 went for Pansy Oakley. 9 went for Packy McLeod. So the majority of you were of the opinion that Packy McLeod was the answer. Only 2 wanted a Rusty Nail, and 5 went for Tank Tinker. And the 5 of you who went for Tank Tinker nailed it. Oh, no pun intended. Last but not least, what were the birth names of Roy Rogers and Dale Evans? And this one, the majority, 14 out of 17, thought it was C, Leonard Sly and Francis Smith. Nobody thought it was A, Travis Ploutz and Betty Sue Olson. B, Roy Evans and Dale Rogers, which I kind of liked the idea of it, but I figured it was just too much fun to be true. But one of you had the courage to go for that. And then D, James Stefanik Jr. and Dolores Miller, 2 of you thought of that, but it was indeed Leonard Sly and Francis Smith. Which brings us to the end of this month's poll, courtesy of Jack French. And thank you for letting me step in for Sally. This is only the second time, I believe, that that happened. So great stuff. Thank you, everybody. And now moving right along. This concludes the sort of the public part of our meeting. And it is wonderful to have so many of you here. I hope you'll stick around for the business portion of the meeting, but as of now, I will stop recording the meeting.